What would you do if, at 25,000 feet above enemy territory, your aircraft's entire cockpit suddenly exploded into a storm of glass and metal, leaving you unable to see anything but your own blood? This is the story of one of the most harrowing bomber missions of World War II, where a young American pilot had to fly his B-17 flying fortress home through 200 miles of hostile German airspace, completely blind. February 20th, 1944. The skies over Nazi Germany. The United States 8th Air Force was deep into Operation Argument, later known as Big Week, a massive strategic bombing campaign designed to cripple Germany's fighter aircraft production. Among the hundreds of B-17s thundering toward their targets, that frozen morning was a single aircraft that would become legendary, a flying fortress from the 379th Bombardment Group, piloted by 2nd Lieutenant Walter Truemper. Group, based at Kimballton, England, was known throughout the 8th Air Force as one of the most reliable and effective heavy bomber units in the European theater. Their B-17’s, bristling with .50 caliber machine guns and capable of carrying 8,000 pounds of ordnance, represented America's commitment to daylight precision bombing, a strategy that was as dangerous as it was necessary. Just 23 years old, was a quiet, methodical pilot from Aurora, Illinois. He'd completed his training stateside with honors and arrived in England in late 1943. Though relatively inexperienced with only 8 combat missions under his belt, Truemper had already earned the respect of his crew for his steady hand and calm demeanor under fire. His co-pilot, 2nd Lieutenant Ronald Bartley, was even younger, barely 22. But the two men had developed the kind of seamless coordination that kept bomber crews alive. The mission briefing that morning had been sobering. Intelligence reported that German fighter defenses had been reinforced along the route to the target. The Luftwaffe's aircraft manufacturing facilities at Leipzig, the crews could expect swarms of Messerschmitt Bf-19s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, along with the dreaded flak belts, zones of concentrated anti-aircraft fire that could turn the sky black with exploding steel. Every man in that briefing room understood the odds. Big Week had already cost the 8th Air Force dozens of bombers and hundreds of airmen. But the mission was critical. Germany's fighter production had to be stopped, whatever the cost, at 0827 hours. Truemper's B-17 lifted off from Kimballton's runway, joining the massive aerial armada forming over the English countryside. By 0915, the formation had crossed the Channel. The first signs of trouble came just after 1000 hours. As the bomber stream approached the German border, black puffs of flak began appearing around the formation, at first scattered, then increasingly concentrated. The German anti-aircraft batteries had their range. Inside the bombers, men instinctively hunched lower, knowing their thin aluminum skin offered virtually no protection against the jagged steel fragments that could tear through a fuselage like paper. The temperature at altitude hovered around -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice formed on the oxygen masks. Each breath was a labor dot. By 11:30 hours, the Luftwaffe arrived in force. Truemper's navigator, 2nd Lieutenant John Rentz, counted at least 40 German fighters swarming the formation. The Messerschmitts came in fast, wings twinkling with 20mm cannon fire. The B-17's gunners hammered back with their .50 calibers, filling the sky with tracer rounds. The cacophony was overwhelming. The roar of engines, the thunder of machine guns, the crash of flak explosions, all mixing into a hellish symphony of mechanized warfare. Truemper held his position in the formation. This was the doctrine: stay tight, maintain mutual defensive fire, press on to the target. The B-17 earned its Flying Fortress nickname through exactly this kind of disciplined flying. But staying in formation also meant flying straight and level through the worst of the enemy fire. At 12:05 hours, they reached Leipzig. The bomb bay doors rumbled open. Below, through breaks in the cloud cover, Truemper could see the industrial sprawl of the aircraft factories. This is what they'd come for. The bombardier, 2nd Lieutenant Harold Fisher, hunched over his Norden bomb sight, making minute adjustments. Steady, steady, he called over the intercom. The flak intensified. The Germans knew exactly where the bombers were heading, and they'd positioned their 88mm batteries in a murderous gauntlet around the factories. The sky turned black with explosions. Shrapnel rattled against the aircraft like deadly hail. One burst lifted the B-17, throwing men against bulkheads. Another tore a hole in the left wing. Bombs away. Fisher's voice crackled through the headsets. The B-17 lurched upward as 8,000 pounds of high explosives dropped toward the target. Now came the most dangerous part, turning away from the target and beginning the long flight home through hundreds of miles of German-controlled airspace. They were barely 5 minutes off the target when it happened. A Focke-Wulf FW-190 dove out. Of the Sun, its 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns blazing. The German pilot had chosen his angle perfectly. Coming in from the 12 o'clock high position, the B-17's blind spot before the top turret gunner could even swing his guns. Around, the fighter's shells smashed directly into the cockpit. The impact was catastrophic. The entire plexiglass nose section exploded inward in a storm of razor-sharp fragments. Cannon shells tore through the instrument panel, shredding cables, hydraulic lines, and control mechanisms. The cockpit instantly transformed into a maelstrom of wind, debris, and blood. The temperature, which had been carefully maintained at a survivable level, plummeted immediately to the outside air temperature of -40 degrees. Co-pilot Ronald Bartley took the worst of it. Multiple shell fragments struck him in the head and upper body. He slumped forward over the controls, critically wounded, blood freezing almost instantly in the savage cold. The navigator, John Rentz, rushing forward from his station to help, was struck by shrapnel and knocked unconscious. Lieutenant Truemper felt the impact as burning pain across his face. He'd been struck by flying plexiglass and metal fragments. Blood streamed from multiple lacerations around his eyes and forehead. But worse, far worse, the combination of wounds, the sudden blast of freezing air, and the debris had left him effectively blind. He could make out vague shapes, shadows, movements of light and dark, but no detail, no instruments, no horizon, nothing. The B-17, with its pilot dead or dying, and its commander unable to see, began falling out of formation. Staff Sergeant Archie Mathies, the top turret, gunner, and engineer, realized immediately what had happened. Without hesitation, he dropped from his turret and rushed forward into the devastated cockpit. What he found there would have broken a lesser man, his co-pilot dying, his navigator unconscious, and his pilot bleeding from facial wounds, hands gripping the yoke in a white-knuckled death grip. Flying blind, the situation was impossible. We're deep in German territory, surrounded by enemy fighters, losing altitude, and effectively leaderless. The aircraft's hydraulic systems were damaged. Several instruments were destroyed. The intercom was partially inoperative, and the temperature in the cockpit was so cold that exposed skin would freeze in seconds. Mathies assessed their options in an instant. He had basic pilot training, enough to understand the controls, but nowhere near enough to actually fly a B-17 through combat and navigate. 200 miles back to England, Truemper, though blind, was the only rated pilot still conscious. If they were going to survive, they would have to work together in a way no bomber crew had ever attempted. "Lieutenant, I can see for you," Mathies shouted over the howling wind. "Tell me what you need." What followed was an unprecedented act of teamwork and courage. Truemper, fighting through pain and shock, would work the controls by feel and by memory of where the instruments should be. Mathies would position himself where he could see outside the shattered cockpit and relay information: altitude, attitude, heading. Together, pilot and engineer would become a single functioning unit. "We're banking right," Mathies called out. Truemper made the correction. Altitude 23,000 feet, dropping, another adjustment. They fell into a rhythm. Mathies would call out readings. Truemper, hands steady, despite everything, would respond with micro-adjustments to throttle, yoke, and rudder. The other crew members, realizing what was happening, provided support however they could. The bombardier took over navigation duties. The radio operator maintained communication with any Allied aircraft in range. The gunners kept watch for enemy fighters, though. They all knew that if the Luftwaffe decided to press an attack on their crippled bomber, there would be little they could do. For nearly 3 hours, Truemper flew that bomber by instinct and touch. He couldn't see the instrument panel, but years of training had built muscle memory. He knew how the yoke should feel at different speeds. He could sense changes in engine pitch. He could tell from the pressure on the controls whether they were climbing or descending, turning or flying straight. Mathies became his eyes. Left wing dropping. Adjust heading, coming right. Altitude, good. The engineer never wavered, never panicked, delivering clear, precise information even as the temperature in the cockpit caused frostbite on his exposed skin. They crossed back over the Belgian border around 14:30 hours. The immediate danger of German fighters diminished, but a new challenge emerged. Landing a B-17 was difficult enough, with full visibility and all systems functioning. Attempting it blind, with damaged hydraulics and an injured crew, was virtually impossible as they approached the English coast. Mathies managed to establish radio contact with RAF Fighter Command. Word spread quickly about the crippled bomber and its blind pilot. Emergency crews at multiple airfields were put on alert. But Truemper made a decision. He would try to bring his crew home to Kimballton. They'd taken off together. They'd land. Together, by 15-20 hours, they were in the landing pattern. Other bombers cleared the airspace. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway. Every man on the ground watched in silent prayer as the damaged B-17 made its approach. Second, descending to fast, Truemper eased back on the yoke. Right wing low, a touch of aileron correction. 500 feet, 400 feet, 300 feet, ... double quotes, the wheels touched down with a jolt, not perfect, but down. Truemper, still unable to see, kept the bomber straight on the runway by feel alone until they rolled to a stop. When the ambulance crews reached the aircraft, they found a scene that defied comprehension. The cockpit was completely destroyed, coated in frozen blood and debris. Co-pilot Bartley was rushed to the base hospital, but died from his wounds hours later. Navigator Rentz survived with serious injuries. Truemper was immediately treated for his facial wounds and exposure injuries, but the true miracle was that the aircraft had made it home at all. The official mission report, filed by the 379th Bombardment Group, called it one of the most remarkable examples of courage and skill in the history of aerial warfare. The crew had flown 200 miles through enemy territory with a blind pilot, a dying co-pilot, damaged systems, and sub-zero temperatures in an open cockpit. The decorations came swiftly. Second Lieutenant Walter Truemper was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. He was killed in action just 3 days later on another mission over Europe before he could receive the medal. Staff Sergeant Archie Mathies also received the Medal of Honor posthumously, killed in the same mission alongside. The citation specifically mentioned their actions on February 20th, noting that their extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty had saved the lives of their crew. The mission itself was part of Big Week's strategic success, despite heavy losses. The Allied bomber offensive destroyed or severely damaged numerous German aircraft production facilities. The Luftwaffe would never fully recover from these raids. The 379th Bombardment Group continued to fly missions throughout 1944 and 1945, ultimately completing 330 combat missions and earning a Distinguished Unit Citation. The story of Truemper and Mathies became legend within the 8th Air Force. It represented everything the Army Air Forces valued: technical skill, raw courage, teamwork under impossible conditions, and an unwavering commitment to bringing every man home. Training programs incorporated their story as an example of what determination and improvisation could achieve. Today, the mission is remembered as a testament to the extraordinary things ordinary men can accomplish when pushed to their absolute limits. 2 young Americans, one a 23-year-old pilot from Illinois, the other a 24-year-old engineer from Pennsylvania, faced death at 25,000 feet and chose to fight back with everything they had. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.